This episode is brought to you by Peloton. This year, Peloton is gifting you their best offer of the season. Get up to $300 off accessories like cycling shoes, a heart rate monitor, and more when you purchase a Peloton bike, Bike Plus, or Tread. Whether you have 10 minutes to spare for a strength class or 30 for a cycling class, there's a workout that works for you. To learn more, visit onepeloton.com. All access membership separate. Offer starts November 14th and ends November 28th. Cannot be combined with other offers. See additional terms at onepeloton.com.
I love the smell of salt water in the air.
And the warm glow of the sun kissing your cheeks.
This is so relaxing. I wish this could never end.
Me too. Oh well.
Hey, give me my homework back.
Stop touching me.
You stop touching me. Dad.
Coastal Morning, one of 3 exclusive rejuvenation moods from Lincoln, designed to enhance your state of mind with choreographed experiences of scent, light, music, and even massage. Learn more about the future of Sanctuary at Lincoln.com.
Tawny Lara is a New York-based writer who specializes in sobriety and sex. Got your attention now, right? She hosts the Recovery Rocks podcast, and her work examining the cross-section of sobriety and sex, it's featured in Playboy, Men's Health, and Huffington Post. I promise you will learn a lot over the course of the next hour. But first, Kevin Souza.
Stand by the ocean floor.
Hello?
Tawny.
Hey.
Hey, what's going on?
Let me put in my ear pods.
Do what you got to do.
All right. Can you hear me okay?
I hear you great. But first of all, thank you so much for taking the time.
Yeah, definitely. It was so cool that you reached out. Yeah, I Googled you and I checked out your work, and it's cool. I've been looking forward to this.
Yeah, so I passed the test.
Exactly.
The more and more I do this, I'm looking for people in recovery and, who have different stories in recovery, and yours jumped out at me. And then I was reading about you. I was like, oh, cool. New York City. And I was like, wait a minute. So you grew up in Waco?
I did. Yeah. I am originally from Northern California, but Mom and I moved to Waco when I was 8. So I pretty much grew up in Waco.
I like to start out with somebody's sobriety date. What is your sobriety date?
November 30th, 2015.
All right, November 30th, 2015. So about 6 years, almost?
Yeah.
What was that last day like? What led you to, and I'm reading about you too, I thought it was pretty cool. You don't have that quote unquote dramatic bottom, which I think a lot of people think that they have to wait on. Yours was a little different.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that, because I think it's an important thing to touch on. I knew for years that I definitely drank too much, and I had moments that probably should have been like these big realization moments. But for me, it was, sitting in a pub in New York City after I moved from Texas to New York, and sitting in a pub in New York, and I'm just with my friends, and I'm talking about how I don't have enough time to write. And then I left the pub and I realized, okay, I just spent 4 hours sitting in a bar talking about how I don't have time to write while drinking. And it just kind of clicked to me that there might be some correlation there.
When was the first time you remember drinking, getting high, controlled substance, that mind-altering feeling?
Well, it definitely started in high school, partying, and it's a very stereotypical story of, weed was my gateway drug, and then I tried a whole bunch of stuff. And then not even when I turned 21, just when I got started bartending and working in the Waco bar and restaurant scene, I started drinking pretty heavily. And I was like 19, 20, because it was just, when all the bartenders, everyone kind of let you in. So it was just, switched to alcohol pretty early on. And then I got sober at 29, like right before my 30th birthday. So it was, a good chunk of my life getting wasted.
We're talking about formative years too.
Yeah.
So we're a whole evolution of the person is not taking place. Because for me, it was, at least, I was constantly pouring alcohol or taking substances that would squash all my feelings.
Yes, exactly. And I'm glad you pointed that out. It was formative years. And, I like the conversation about, how alcohol and substance abuse in general impacts arrested development of, once you start self-medicating at a certain age, your development is halted. So, I got sober at 29, but I started self-medicating at 15, 16. So I was this 29-year-old with like this teenage mentality because everything was stunted emotionally and mentally in me.
Do you have alcoholism in your family?
My father is now in recovery as well. And I have a grandfather who actually died of alcoholism, and he's an alcoholic diabetic, which was not a good combination.
No, yeah.
So he died pretty young, like mid-50s. And my dad got sober. He's been sober about 14 years now.
Oh, wow. So did you kind of see his life change through sobriety? And then that was something you kind of, for me, it was, at least I had a friend who got sober when I was 18 because we were partying pretty hard. And then I had my brother who got sober probably like 14, 15 years ago. So I knew there was a way out. Did your father, did that plant the seed at all?
It might have subliminally, but I honestly don't know the answer to that. He and I geographically were not very close. So like I grew up in Texas, like born in Northern California. Mom and I moved to Waco, but dad stayed in Northern California. So I would go visit him every year, but like it wasn't like an everyday thing. I wasn't a huge part of his sobriety,
Mm-hmm. You mentioned, I just kind of doing a little research on you and reading, you said there was trauma behind the drinking and drugs. And there was also, it sounds to me like I think I had both. There were parts of trauma that I just stuffed away. And also it's in my blood. The alcoholism is in my blood. Describe to the person that doesn't know what it's like to have that double whammy.
Yeah. I didn't have the self-awareness to correlate the two at the time. Looking back, I can see it's like textbook. Oh yeah, like something happened to her, so she started self-medicating and then didn't stop until like 14 years later. Like it's textbook, right? But at the time, I was just going through so much emotional turmoil that like drugs were presented to me in like this fun way. And it just gave me, like weed just gave me this sense of escapism, like, because I was in therapy, I was trying antidepressants, I was like, all of that takes a lot of work, right? Like it's a lot of time and energy. And then there's this drug or drink that just instantly makes it go away. Like, yeah, of course, like I chose the latter.
What was some of the trauma? Do you feel comfortable sharing that or?
No, it's just something, something really bad happened and I didn't know that it was really bad at the time. And it's something that I'm still processing through therapy now. Trauma is definitely tied to my substance abuse.
Well, and we talk about it too. Like I'm still uncovering trauma that I, like you said, didn't think was trauma. And we're never finished in sobriety, which is like one of the most beautiful things about it. I'm a different person than I was a year ago. I want to talk a little bit about your those formative years we talked about. How did you progress? Like, was there a moment in high school or when you were younger as a teen when you're like, man, I love this stuff?
It was honestly that very first moment that I smoked weed. Like it was, I got high. I instantly felt light and no longer, like I wasn't thinking about trauma. I wasn't thinking about family dynamics. I wasn't thinking about awkward teen years, even just like the normal puberty that's really hard to deal with, without all this other stuff. I was like, wow, I don't have to deal with any of this. If I just take this thing, then I don't have to feel reality. Obviously I didn't articulate it at the time, but it was very clear that, smoking this takes me out of myself. And that's just something that, then I transferred into alcohol. just a couple years later, and just partying. I just was really into partying. I was just a social drinker. I liked the party. I didn't drink alone a whole lot. I just loved, like, I would go days, weeks, months without drinking sometimes. I often didn't, but I think that's important to discuss too, where, people think a drinking problem means you're waking up every morning and there's a bottle of Jack on your nightstand and you're turning it up as soon as you wake up. And that can be true for sure, but someone like me, where I was a bartending party girl who, when I drank until I blacked out, and that's also a problematic way to drink.
Were you a good bartender?
I was a great bartender, and I honestly, it's fun. I miss it.
Yeah, the interaction, the people. I think there's a lot. It's funny. It's not so odd that you see people who are bartenders get sober and really flourish once they find those, or they rediscover, they tap into those people skills they have.
That is such a good point. I went to college, but I really think I learned a lot of what helps me out today from bartending, like connection, networking. So in Waco, I was at Treff's, I was at George's, Cricket, Diamondbacks. I bartended at all of these.
No kidding.
Yeah, I mean, I ran the gamut.
You did. I mean, for people that are listening from around the country, she mentioned hole in the walls all the way up to the nicest steakhouse in town.
Yeah, definitely. It's I liked it. I liked the job was fun. I liked the money was incredible. I mean, it's a fun job if you don't get sucked into it. There's a lot of people that can work in the restaurant industry through college, and they work a couple days a week and that's it. But for me, it was my whole life. If I wasn't bartending, I was on the other end of the bar drinking with my bartending friends. So it was all consuming for me. Did you
have people in your life, because it sounds like, and then just kind of looking at your story, you were pretty functional. Did you have people in your life who were like, hey, you need to stop this? Or was it something where you realized it, like you mentioned, sitting on that stool at that pub or after you left? Was it yourself who realized it, or did you have some help along the way?
No, it was myself. And I think it's because, or, if someone did say something along the way, I don't remember it,
Yeah.
So, because honestly, I was hanging out with people that drank like me. So that was it. There would be times when I'd tell my friends let's not drink this week, or let's only have one drink tonight. Or there would be times that I think I knew on some level that this isn't healthy, but then I would talk to my friends who were also just like me, and then it just didn't stick. They're like, no, we're fine. We're in our early 20s. We're having a good time. And it's there's definitely people that can go through a binge drinking phase of life, in college, or, and grow out of it. And then eventually just, they have a glass of wine every once in a while. That's very common, but I'm not one of those people, but it's common. A lot of people that I used to party with are quote normal drinkers now, and they have a beer and that's it. And I'm like, wow, that's so cool. I've never done that before.
Where did you go to school, by the way?
So I went to MCC, McQuennan Community College, and then they have a Tarleton program, which Tarleton, the actual campus, is in Stephenville, Texas, but they have MCC offered the course, the business courses on the MCC campus. So I was able to get my full bachelor's degree through MCC through Tarleton. And so you finish up here,
in Central Texas. One thing I want to ask you too, as we move forward in your career, what was the drug scene like? Were you doing cocaine, or was it strictly weed and alcohol?
It was mostly just weed and booze. I mean, I definitely had fun with other party favors, but the biggest problem for me was definitely alcohol.
And so how did your career progress? When did you discover writing?
As a kid, I mean, I always knew that I wanted to write, and I always did write, like whether it was in a journal or, like when the movie Harriet the Spy came out,
Yeah.
I was obsessed. Like I got a little yellow raincoat and I was like running around with a composition notebook, just like spying on people, like just thinking that I was inconspicuous, but I was very clearly like a weird girl in a yellow raincoat, jotting everything down. But I just, at a young age, I knew that everything had a story behind it, and I was fascinated by it. Whether it was, I often tell my own story, but I'm also a journalist where I do enjoy telling the story of others. And that's always been something that's interested me. And, but then once it kind of stopped once I started using, I mean, I was writing at 14, I was writing for the Waco Trib had a teen section, and I was writing for that. I was writing very controversial feminist op-eds for the Waco Trib.
Yeah, which is a big deal back then, and especially here.
Yes, exactly. So in the year 2000, I was a freshman in high school writing about, gay marriage, legalizing marijuana, like from an articulate perspective. And I actually, I got hate mail. I still have it. I got hate mail from people. But and that was the moment that really taught me that words have power. And that just really stuck with me. And once then I, got lost in the whole party scene. And eventually, I became a Zumba instructor in Waco, which led to me getting my business degree. And I'm honestly really glad that I'm a writer with a business degree now, because there's such a large business component of being, a freelancer I'm running my own business essentially.
Just to get the connective tissue down. So you're a Zumba instructor who starts their own business, and therefore you move towards getting a degree in business.
Yes. Okay. Sorry. Yeah. So it's the same. Yeah. So
Sure.
kind of like being a freelance writer, I was a freelance, Zumba instructor where I would host classes, people would pay me, and then I managed the books from there. So that got me interested in the business world, business and marketing. And so, once I finished college, I actually just got back into writing and eventually moved to New York, and here we are almost 6 years later.
What was your, not so fast. What was your big break? What was your big, I want to get to, I love the progress of this. I like talking to you a lot. What was what was the break that took you from Waco, from Central Texas to New York City?
After I graduated, I actually moved to the Woodlands for a year because I wanted to get out of Waco, but I didn't really know what the plan was. I just knew I wanted to get out of Waco and just explore other parts of the city. Like, my mom is still there. I still love Waco, and but I had been there for 20 years. So I was like, okay, what's next? So I moved to the Woodlands, moved in with my aunt for a little bit.
For people who don't know, describe the Woodlands.
The Woodlands, yes. North Houston, very if you've seen the movie Pleasantville, I say it's like that, where it's very perfect. I don't know how else to describe it.
Yeah, I think you did a good job.
It's if you haven't seen Pleasantville, just Google it and you'll see an image and you'll know what I'm talking about. But so after that, I got a job in the Woodlands with Lululemon, and got really, I was already into the fitness world because I was a Zumba instructor. So then I got into yoga, and Lululemon is a really good company that gets you, they're very goal oriented. So, I work my boss was kind of like a life coach type relationship. And she, really helped me figure out my goals and what I want out of life. And I realized that I wanted to get back into writing, and that's what brought me to New York.
How much was drinking a part of your writing? I talked to a guy a couple weeks ago who writes for TV Guide, and we discussed that. I asked him, I said, you think about the historic, Hemingway, how alcohol was a big part of his writing and some of the culture with the beatniks. Did you experience that at all?
No, not at all, honestly, because so like my writing, like when I was 14 writing for the Waco Trib, I was like very coherent, like not using any substances. And then from like 14 to 29, I was really not writing at all. And that was like peak drinking. So it's like, as soon as I got away from alcohol or at least started to cut back from drinking, that's when my writing really began to flourish.
And so you're sitting on that bar stool, right? I mean, like it's interesting. You talk to people who get sober. Was there all like, we have these revelations as we evolve, even when, like looking back now, I'm talking to you, it's like, you know, you were 29 and to me, I'm sitting up over here in the cheap seats. It's like, okay, I want to be the 14-year-old Tawny. You know,
Yeah.
right? Like I want that fire back. I used to do so much creative stuff as a kid. I would make up these fake magazines. I would sit in front of the TV and broadcast and tape it. I would make up, you know, news like VHS tapes. And, you know, none of that mattered once I started to drink. None of it.
I relate to all of that completely. Like I said, being that, you know, young girl who wanted to be Harriet the Spy and writing for the Trib, like all of that went away. Like once I started self-medicating, all of it. Like my grades dropped. Like I was a really good student. Then my grades dropped. I lost interest in pretty much anything that didn't have anything to do with partying. And, you know, it took me 10 years to get through college.
Yeah, that sounds like the bartender. Yeah, the bartender.
Yeah.
Right, college student. So
yeah, I really extended the college life as long as I could.
Well, a good place to extend the party is New York City. So you get a job there. Do you go there from Lululemon? Are you still working under the Lululemon corporate umbrella, or do you move there to freelance write or to write for a certain outlet?
It was both. So I moved here knowing that I had the day job that, you know, it paid decently and it was good health insurance. So it carried me here. And I was just open to possibility. Like I didn't, I think about the move now and I'm like, would I still do this today? Like my hair was hot pink at the time. I buy a one-way ticket to New York City, with my only plan was that I had been selected to attend a 2-week creative writing intensive at NYU. So that was I could have just gone to New York for 2 weeks to take this class, right? But I was just like full addict mindset. I was like, I'm just going to buy a one-way ticket and move to New York. So like my first 2 weeks, like I know that I'm going to be going to NYU and I am living in a dorm. Like that's it. I don't know anybody in New York City. I have zero plans and, but I'm going to make it work.
Did alcohol help you make it work?
It's interesting. Like once I got away from the party scene, I noticed that I drank less. Like once I stopped bartending, I was going out for drinks with these new friends from NYU. And, we would have, a drink or two after class, and everyone would go home and work on their homework because it was an intensive. Like it was, every single day for 14 days. It was a lot. So I was the weirdo that wanted to drink more. And so that kind of put a spotlight for me of like, we're going out on a Tuesday after class to just kind of unwind and decompress. And I go to the bar and like buy a round of shots and people are like, what are you doing? Like,
Yeah.
why? And I was like, oh, they don't drink like this. So like, that was like a really big red flag for me.
So one of the things that's super interesting about you, when I look at your bio, it says sex, sobriety, rock and roll. Sex is first, Tawny. That's the biggest fear. When I talk to other guys who are getting sober, where do we start when we're talking about this? Like sex and relationships. I mean, you mentioned kind of the shutting down of the evolution. When you're 14, you start to drink. I mean, did you ever even develop the skills to have a relationship?
Probably not. No, I had a really, for me, like sex and even just dating was largely performative because I was trying to be what the other person wanted me to be, as opposed to like owning who I am and like, and saying and doing things that I want. Like, dating is really, really, really hard.
Yeah.
Sex is complicated. Like, all of that is really challenging. And then you throw sobriety or alcoholism or addiction or, substance abuse. You throw any of that in the mix and it's even harder. So it's like, that's why this is one of my favorite topics, because when I got sober, there was like really no guidebook of like how to navigate sex and dating. So like, that's really my target audience is like 30-year-old me, who's like, what advice did I need at the time,
And so how did you find your way? I mean, for me, it was a 12-step program. Generally, was it talking to other women in sobriety, talking to other dudes? I mean, part of your story is did you discover your bisexuality before you stopped drinking or after?
Yeah. So on the bi note, I've always been attracted to and dated men and women. Like it's always been me. I have 2 queer family members. So it's been I grew up knowing that it's okay. Like I didn't have any shame about it. Why I tie my bisexuality to my sobriety is that I didn't think I was, quote, bisexual enough, because all of my long-term relationships were with men. So I was like, oh, well, if you were really bisexual, then you would have had more relationships with women. So there was a lot of internalized biphobia that I didn't really get to unpack until I got sober. So that's where that connection comes from. And then, so my program was honestly therapy, yoga, meditation, and something that I would not recommend to anybody was I started a blog the day I quit drinking and documented everything on it. So writing, but like I look back at like those early posts and I'm cringing.
Yeah.
But I also love that I have that documented in a way,
It's funny. I mean, I know that it's that expression. For me, it was, it was a 12-step program, but it's also just really talking to other people in recovery or honestly, other people about recovery is also really helpful for me. People who are curious about it. And sounds like kind of what you did with that blog. And it is dangerous, right? When you first get sober, you can be unfiltered. And there's a reason why some people, recommend, hey, you may not want to date for a little bit. You just need a little time to kind of get everything together.
Absolutely. And I've definitely been to AA meetings, and I am so glad that it's an option. It didn't click for me, but I will say I met my partner in an AA meeting. So I definitely got what I needed out of it.
It is funny because I talk about this with other people that are sober. There's just more than one way, for pardon the term, but to skin a cat. I mean, there's so many different ways to do this. And somebody like you is extremely attractive because it's very obvious you're living a full life. Sometimes in the program we'll say, you're wearing life like a loose shirt. How did you find that?
Well, I will say, and this kind of plugs back into the sex and dating as well, is that it takes a significant amount of confidence to get sober, or even to just question your relationship and, step back, drink less. Like that takes a lot of confidence. So I always tell people that when people are like, how am I going to go on a date sober? How am I going to have sober sex for the first time? I tell people, like, channel that confidence that you had the moment you decided to stop drinking, and that you have every single day to stay sober, because like society has us taught that we need this liquid courage to like let loose in the bedroom or get rid of those first date jitters. And that's not the case. Like we have that within us. We just have to tap into it.
When Shopify says you can sell anywhere, oh, they mean it. Woo, hold up. Just got a new sale. Whoa, Shopify doesn't mind if you're at sea level or on top of the world.
Whether you're selling carabiners or crop tops, start selling with Shopify today and join the platform simplifying commerce for millions of businesses worldwide. This is Possibility, powered by Shopify. Sign up for a free trial at shopify.com/offer22. Shopify.com/offer22.
5G is here, but the big carriers want you to sign a long-term contract to get access. Well, not anymore, because Straight Talk Wireless has rolled out 5G coverage nationwide with deals like our Silver Unlimited plan for just $45 a month and no contract. And get a Samsung Galaxy A13 5G for $149, all on a reliable 5G network. 5G coverage, 5G phones, less money. Straight Talk Wireless. Available at Walmart and Walmart.com. 1 month equals 30 days. 5G capable device required. Actual availability, coverage, and speed may vary. See latest terms and conditions at straighttalk.com.
It's such a lie. I try to tell people that alcohol and drugs were the biggest liars in my life. I was convinced that I needed them, whether it was something subtle, like if I was going to talk in front of people, I need a couple of drinks or to go on a date. And, I like the fact that you bring up that it is kind of a big lie. You mentioned it, sex and sobriety. What do you tell people about that?
That's a big question.
It's
what
pretty
about
broad,
it?
right? Yeah. I mean, what do you tell people who say, I'm nervous about experiencing intimacy with somebody when they first get sober?
I mean, tell them that definitely they're not alone. I mean, it can be a scary thing, especially if they're, we know as people in recovery, but a lot of substance abuse is connected to trauma and assault, and, people that have experienced sexual assault, their recovery can be a part of that too. So like dealing with that and then having to reintroduce sex, that can be re-traumatizing. So, I am not a mental health professional, but I recommend if you can afford it, definitely find a therapist that can help you, or some sort of support group. But at the very bare minimum, never do anything that you don't feel comfortable doing. And I mean, that applies to sober sex or just life in general, like if you find yourself having like so much anxiety about going on your first sober date or your first sober kiss, like if you are so overwhelmed with anxiety, it's probably not the right time, and that's totally okay. And if this person that you would go on a date with or sleep with is worth your time, they will totally understand that.
It goes back to what you were saying, right, about your partner, like trying to be something for them.
Yeah.
That's a breakthrough.
Exactly.
That's a breakthrough moment in sobriety when you can start making those decisions for yourself.
It really is. Like if you can just say like, you know what, I'm not ready for this. I mean, most people are decent. They'll be like, okay, yeah, no worries. Like, do you just want to watch TV? But the people aren't mind readers. Like you have to tell them how you're feeling. And that's hard. Like a lot of people weren't raised in households where you are told to talk about your feelings. So that I understand how that can be difficult, but I will say that communication is the most important part to any relationship, whether it's romantic, family, friendship, anything. Like if you don't have strong communication, like what can you really build on?
Was it something where you found yourself flexing a muscle to have that communication and that confidence in sobriety? Because the first time for me, it was not. The first time I went on a date when I was sober, I think I almost passed out because I was so nervous.
Yeah, it's definitely flexing a muscle. It's something I still struggle with. I quit drinking at the end of 2015, and I'm in a committed relationship, but there's still times that I struggle with wanting to please someone else over myself. And there's definitely a time and a place for that. But like when you're talking about communication of, you can start somewhere small where it's like, if you're kind of an easygoing person and your partner's always like, where do you want to go to dinner? And you genuinely just like, don't care. Just like pick a place, like it can really like start that simple of just like, okay, I'm going to pick a restaurant. This is where I want to go. And like start flexing that muscle.
What was more freeing for you when you discovered, or you were able to be exactly who you wanted to be sexually, or when you were able to get sober?
I don't think I wouldn't be where I am today without sobriety. Like sobriety got me, my writing career is thriving because I don't drink. I am fully in tune to myself as a woman, as a human, as a sexual being, because I'm not clouded by alcohol. It's like it all goes back to sobriety.
You're in New York City. Obviously, we've had a crazy year, but before that, you seem like an extremely social person. How do you tell somebody coming up behind you, or how did you yourself start to navigate such a big world in sobriety, you know, social situations, things like that.
Like navigating social situations in sobriety, like going to parties
going
or
out,
events.
going to parties. Because you mentioned you loved, not only did you like the drugs and the alcohol and the weed, but you also liked the partying side of it.
Yeah, I still do. I mean, I still am a party girl. I mean, I love, you know, that just shows up now in like dinner parties or a tea party, or, you know, getting a group of friends together at a restaurant, or, you know, there's different ways to like flex that extroverted personality. But I also learned that a lot of my extroversion was related to my drinking. Now, when I have like these events, like a big event, whether it's like I actually do host like big in-person events in the city, or something like a dinner party, you know, I am exhausted, like mentally drained for like a day or two after that. Like it takes a lot out of me. And whereas before I wasn't, you know, when I was drinking, I wasn't in tune with how my body was feeling, that's why I drank in the first place. Right. So it's just, I didn't really give myself that recovery time. I just kept the party going.
I had an experience the other night. I was out with a friend of mine, a guy who I consider like a brother, and I hadn't been around him in a while. Anyways, I was with him, and, you know, like some drugs came out or whatever. And, you know, on most days, or hopefully, you know, I'm spiritually fit. And it came out, you know, I didn't pay any mind to it. I still had a great time. People in the room knew I was sober. They were asked. And like, what a miracle that is, to be in a situation like that. For me, I felt so strong. I felt so empowered. And I was like, man, this recovery thing really does work.
Yeah, it really does. And it's like, it sounds like you have a supportive community of people, or at least that were in that room, because that is so essential. Like, before you go to your first, you know, party or outing, whatever it is, like, make sure that your friends know like what's going on. Like, even if you don't want to, you don't have to be like, I'm recovering from trauma and substance abuse disorder. Yeah. But you can say, hey, you know, I'm going through some shit. I might duck out early, or, you know, just letting them know what's going on with you. And if any good friend will totally respect that. And like, and I think about, you know, I mentioned earlier, like my partying friends from back in the day, when I told them I wanted to drink less, they were not supportive. They were, if anything, they were like, yeah, whatever, just order shots already. Whereas now my friends are so considerate of, like, they're like, hey, do you mind if I order a glass of wine with dinner? And I'm like, do you, like, have your wine. I thank you so much for asking. But it's, you know, that comes from, and I can't blame my friends back then. I also didn't establish boundaries. I didn't have a healthy perspective of who I was. I was also people pleasing a lot. So it was just this really like echo chamber of toxicity.
One of the things I want to talk about is you talk about trying on recovery as opposed to trying on sobriety. And I think that is so interesting. There's people who listen to this podcast, or people who may be listening to this podcast, who, you know, maybe not, they're not sure if they have a problem with alcohol. You know, what do you tell those people as far as the difference between trying on recovery and trying on sobriety?
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up. It really, that article came out of like a pet peeve of seeing people doing like a dry January or a Whole30, or, you know, some sort of drinking challenge, and then they celebrate on social media by posting pictures of a mimosa. Yeah. And it's like, okay, you know, like, what are you doing? So I think that anyone that doesn't have addiction or substance abuse disorder or alcohol use disorder, any quote normal drinker cannot drink for 30 days, 60 days, a year, whatever. Like, I think anybody can do that, and that's like pretty easy. But, and I say easy because, like, as opposed to like someone with actual substance abuse disorder who needs help. Yeah. You know, that's what I mean by saying easy. But recovery, that is not easy. So when I say trying on sobriety instead of recovery, I mean, like, don't just not drink for 30 days. Or
trying on recovery instead of trying on. What is the one you want to do? Trying on recovery, right?
Yeah, I mean,
okay.
I would recommend trying that where, for example, trying on sobriety would mean not drinking for 30 days. Mm-hmm. Whereas trying on recovery would mean maybe you're going to a support group. Maybe you're talking to your therapist about your relationship with alcohol. Maybe you're journaling about, like, every time you want a drink, maybe you're journaling about that feeling that is prompting you to want to drink. Like, that's what I mean by sobriety versus recovery. Like, anyone can just not drink versus actually doing the work. Like, then why are you trying out? Why are you not drinking for 30 days?
Yeah, why are you stopping? Yeah.
Like, what is the point? Is it just like a social media challenge you're doing? Or is it like something that you really want to learn about yourself? Like, and so the reason that it's such a pet peeve of mine is because, as you know, so many of us, like, it's not a trend. It's not like oh yeah, cool, my 6 years is up, I'm going to start drinking again. It's like, it's not, there's no expiration date on our sobriety. Like, this is our life. So to see people that are like, when I tell someone I'm sober and they're like, oh yeah, I did dry January. I'm like, okay. Like, what? So
how do you how do you respond to that? Kind of, that's how you respond.
I just nod my head,
yeah.
And internally I'm exploding because I hate it so much.
What's the biggest myth about sex in sobriety?
That it's boring. The people think that, I think that's just the biggest myth about sobriety in general. People think it's boring. I was like, if I stop drinking, what am I going to do? Am I just going to have to, like, start quilting all the time and just, like, sitting at home and, like, read books all day and just, like, who am I going to hang out with? How could I even date or have sex? Like, alcohol was just so tied to every part of my existence that I couldn't imagine doing anything without it. And so, yeah, sobriety is not boring. If anything, I think, like, getting wasted all the time is boring because it's just the same thing over and over.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's nothing like when you find that, you find that gear where you really are comfortable in your own skin and it's transitioning into your sex life and into everything else. And it's like, wow.
Exactly. It's like figuring out who you are without this substance. And that shows up in every aspect of our lives, but especially to answer your question, sexually. Like, sobriety doesn't make sex boring. If anything, it can make it even more special because you're fully present and you know what you want and you ask for what you want. And, like, it's, whereas for me, like I was saying before, I was just trying to please other people. I didn't really care much about what I wanted. But sobriety just kind of, like I said, gave me that confidence to get to know myself.
What's your favorite topic when it comes to sobriety and sexuality?
That's a good question. A lot of people ask, like, how to get in the mood without alcohol, whether they're sober or even just normal drinkers that maybe have a glass of wine before they have sex with their partners, or like, because even normies have alcohol tied to sex and dating, right?
For sure.
So like, which I think is such a fascinating conversation. So it's, I recommend, like, kind of like when I was saying trying on sobriety versus recovery, like, if you like, so why do you have a glass of wine with your partner before you're intimate? Like, what does that do for you? Does it help you relax? Does it help you get in the mood? Does it help you lower your inhibitions? Does it help you feel connected? So like, I think, and no one's going to know the answer to that except for you. So I think figuring out, when someone says, how do I have sober sex fun, or fun sober sex? So I'm like, well, why did alcohol make sex so fun for you? And that's something only you can define. So figuring out what those things are, like, oh, well, a glass of wine before sex makes me feel relaxed. Great. Maybe your partner can give you a massage. Maybe you guys can go for a walk before. Maybe you guys don't do screen time an hour before. Maybe you lie in bed in candlelight and just catch up on your day before. Like what do you need? Like what is missing? Like that. And I hate that I'm answering that question with not really an answer, but it's really just like because it's so different for everyone.
It is an answer, though. I mean, it's basically like there's other, you call it a coping skill or call it whatever you want. When you have that anxiety before you get intimate, there's different ways to get yourself comfortable.
You do. And then there's also that connection element of alcohol quite literally disconnects you from your body and from your partner. And it desensitizes you too. I mean, so you really people think drunk sex is really fun, I guess, because there's no inhibitions, but you're really not feeling a whole lot. So I don't know. That's why I would just encourage anyone who's asking how to have fun, sober sex, maybe write down a couple things why is alcohol sex so fun?
What do you tell people that aren't sure about being sober and aren't sure about having fun?
I hate to answer this with the same thing, but it's I would just encourage someone to say, why is all of your fun tied to alcohol? Why? What is so great what happened when you were drinking that was so great?
Yeah.
I would just encourage people to note, drinking alcohol isn't an activity. It's not a fun date. It's literally just sitting and drinking. It's not a creative date. It's not a fun, hey, let's catch up over drinks. It's that could easily be tea. That could easily be coffee. I hate how society has done this to us. They make it such a normal thing to catch up over drinks, and to where if you stop drinking alcohol, you have to explain it to people. That's crazy.
Yeah, it totally is. And
That's
it's so true.
So that is so messed up. If someone were to say, hey, I think I'm going to stop doing coke, nobody would question that. But if you tell your partner or your best friend, hey, you know what? I don't want to drink anymore. They'd say, why?
And it totally can turn the relationship on its side, which is scary.
Absolutely. It really changes everything. And you figure out who your real friends are. You figure out if you're in a healthy relationship or not. You figure out the unhealthy family dynamics. I wasn't expecting that. I really thought that I was just going to not drink. I didn't think that it was going to have this ripple effect into every aspect of my life.
Some of the topics you tackle, you examine the intersection of sobriety and sexuality. What's the biggest discovery you made when you took a look at that?
I think the liquid courage I think that is a topic that I'm kind of obsessed with right now, whether it's, liquid courage to get rid of first date jitters or to feel confident enough to ask, to try something new in the bedroom. Alcohol is just so tied to that. Even on really progressive shows, like Sex and the City, Terry Bradshaw, the famous sex writer, if she has to get drunk before she talks about sex with her partner, then what are us normal people supposed to do? I look at how it's represented, and I think it's getting better, but it's just so ingrained in everything that we do. And the fact that the fact that the sober sex conversation is so scary and overwhelming, that honestly makes me sad, because it shouldn't be, I wish that there were more tools or guidebooks or, anything like that, which is, essentially where my work is. But I'm just glad we're in a place, society is in a place where these conversations are okay to have publicly. And I feel like the taboo and the shame is starting to shed.
Yeah, I love you breaking the stigma. And I love the fact that you're one of those people out there that folks can turn to. What moved you to take on this role? I mean, to write about this stuff. You mentioned when you were a kid, you were writing, opinion pieces or a teen section of the Waco Tribune, and you were tackling gay marriage then in 2000. This is not the easiest thing to write about all the time either. What moved you to take this on?
Well, I've always liked to rock the boat. So, I'm drawn to the taboo. I'm drawn to controversy. I'm drawn to, using a megaphone to share conversations and thoughts and for good, as a resource, as a way to help and shine a light. And like I said, when I got sober, I was so overwhelmed by sober sex and dating, and there wasn't a whole lot of resources out there other than talking to people. That's always the best resource is talking to other people that are sober.
But you really got to look for it, Tawny. That's the one thing. That's why I do this podcast, and that's why I think what you've been doing for so long is so cool. Is it's out there. You're putting it out there. A lot of times, and I think it's great, right? We all have our own methods of staying sober and really becoming reinvigorated through recovery. But you have to go to a meeting. You have to go looking for it. I mean, it's pretty cool to be scrolling through your social media feed and to see this writer talking about sex, sobriety, and rock and roll. I mean, that's new.
Yeah, and hopefully people like it because it's, and I think, I get messages all the time from people saying that thank you for writing about this. Thank you for talking about this. Because like you said, it is hard to find that, even if you are close to someone, or even maybe you don't feel comfortable talking to your sponsor about sex, maybe you don't have a close girlfriend or male friend to talk to about sexuality or, gender dysphoria or any of these really complicated conversations in sobriety. So it's I said at the, beginning of our conversation, my target audience is always, late 20s me of who, I need help here. Or what am I going to do? So I think about that, pink haired 29-year-old that was so confused and, who needed help. And I'm writing to her.
Yeah, because it's not that popular to be growing up, or feel like a teenager when you're in your 30s. Nobody wants to. No. People don't love talking about that.
No, it's a very, very, it's an awkward subject. It's just, sex in general can be an awkward conversation, and then you throw sobriety in the mix. When I meet someone and I tell them that meet another writer and they're like, oh, what's your beat? And I'm like, oh, I write about sober sex. They're like, huh. They're taken back. If I were to just say I write about recovery or I write about sex, it would be oh, cool. But then they're like, oh, I've never thought about that. And so I'm if I'm in New York City, in this progressive community and no one's thought about that, then really no one's having this conversation.
What's it like for you, somebody from Waco, from Central Texas, to be in New York and to see your stuff in Playboy, in Men's Health, in Huffington Post? What is that? Is that a moment where you kind of have to pinch yourself?
Oh my gosh, 100%. I always have those moments of wow, I see my name on the byline, and I have my paycheck from that Playboy piece. I have that hanging up above my desk. And I look at that, every day when I'm writing, and I'm like, you got published in Playboy. Never forget that. One of the top sex magazines in history published your work. Because, at being a writer or a creative in general, there's a lot of imposter syndrome that comes with it. So I look at that and I'm like, okay, Playboy published you. Maybe you're a decent writer. You can do this,
And what you're describing to me there is a different coping skill of, rather than reaching for a drink, you look at that check and you're like, oh yeah, that's right. And then you continue to look at that check instead of thinking about, getting messed up.
Exactly. It's, I have that check serves as a reminder. I have little sticky notes on my desk that just remind me of I guess affirmations or whatever, just whatever you got to do to to take it one day at a time. It's really hard. Sobriety is really hard, and never take it for granted, and do what you can do to make it easier on yourself.
Anything else you want to share with people about what you've learned in your journey, or what you're living now that can help them?
Yeah, well, I would tell people that just when it comes to sober sex, I think people know how they feel about certain things. So like, I would just encourage people to lean into that, where it's like, how do I tell, like, I want to embrace my kinky side, but I don't know how. It's like, in your head, there's something you've always wanted to do. Like, everyone has that thing. And like, know that as long as it's between consenting adults and no one gets hurt, like, that's okay. Like, let yourself explore that. And, or even if it's, like, I want to go on a date, but I don't know how, like, just remember, like, you have to be yourself, and you have to communicate how you feel in order for it to be a solid foundation.
And I just remember there's one more thing I wanted to ask you about, and this is a crazy topic. We're not going to have enough time to tackle it in full, but codependency. How do you see that playing out in the bedroom, in relationships, when people first get sober?
Oh, 100%. Like I've mentioned, trying to please other people instead of myself. Like, it could be something as simple as, like not stating where I want to eat for dinner because I want the other person to be happy and I don't want to upset them, or doing something in bed that I'm not necessarily comfortable with, but I know that my partner likes it. Like, those are just two examples of codependency. Like you said, we could do a whole other episode on that, but
asking for a friend, what's the number one thing people can do to break free from that codependency in sobriety, in sober dating and sober sex?
It has to be like self-awareness and communication, and you have to have the confidence and self-awareness to know what you have to have the self-awareness to know, like, what you want sexually or out of life in general. And then you have to have like that self-awareness to like be okay with it. And then you have to have communication to ask for it or state it or to demand it. Like, I think those three all work together to help you get through codependency. And that's a whole other form of recovery, like, once you stop drinking, you learn, oh yeah, I have an issue with this, and yeah, I definitely have an unhealthy relationship with that. So there's all sorts of unhealthy relationships that we have. Like, I think getting sober is kind of the first layer of the onion. But like, there's podcasts about codependency, there's books about codependency, Coda meetings, like Al-Anon is great. Like, there's tons of great resources out there.
Well, you're a great resource. By the way, folks, it doesn't have to end here. The Recovery Rocks podcast, you can listen to that. It's on. You guys are on all platforms, and your work is everywhere. Yeah, I mentioned Playboy, Men's Health, and Huffington Post. Where else can people see you online and stuff? If I'm leaving anything out.
Yeah, no, that's it. Recovery Rocks is where we talk about recovery and rock and roll, and my social media, Tawny Lara, and TawnyLara.com is my website.
For folks, TAWNYLARA.
Yes. Yeah, TAWNYLARA. You can find me on all the social medias and reach out if you have any questions or anything.
Yeah, Tawny, you're awesome. And I reached out to you and you got right back to me, and hopefully we can help some people out with this this hour. And I know you got a call coming up, but I want to say thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you. This is great.
Yeah, you got it. All right, and this will be up this Thursday.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, just send me the link and I'll share it.
You're awesome, Tawny. Thanks so much for what you're doing.
It was nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you too. Thanks so much for listening to the Payoff with Pete. Once again, I'm Pete Souza. And of course, we are part of the Rogue Media Network. All kinds of good podcasts you can find at roguemedianetwork.com. And of course, you can find this podcast and all those other ones wherever you get your podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, other spots like that.
This has been a Rogue Media podcast.
Frozen, Frozen, heroes. Gonna tell you about Frozen, Frozen, heroes. Gonna tell you about.
Hey, I'm Zach.
And I'm Mike.
And we have a fantastic new podcast to tell you about. Bros, Foes, and Heroes. It's the two of us looking into the world of comics, breaking down some characters that you may have never heard of, and some that are just absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, so Zach comes up with a character each time, and I go into it just completely blind. I don't know who this person is or what their abilities are or anything, and basically I guess we kind of go over their origin story and just some of the ridiculous stuff that maybe, especially Golden Age stuff.
Oh, Golden Age stuff is always the best, and we will make sure to highlight all of the shenanigans and just absolute weirdness of everything.
Yeah, that's right. So subscribe today and follow us on Instagram at Bros, Foes, Heroes.
And if you don't, I know where you live. Not really, but please subscribe.
Frozen, Frozen, heroes. Gonna tell you about Frozen, Frozen, heroes. Gonna tell you about.
Welcome to One Star Rewind, a new podcast about those dreaded one-star reviews that every business owner hates to receive, but yet every customer loves to read. During this podcast, we will peel back that one-star review to better understand how it happened, when it happened, and what the business owner is doing after receiving that one-star review. This podcast will be about love, hate, and laughter. On One Star Rewind, we will meet with real business owners who will tell their stories and how they do rely on reviews for their business. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or download us at roguemedianetwork.com. Please subscribe, but only rate and review for not a one-star review. Join us each time for a new review and a new story.